someone in Uganda recently made a statement that colonialism is the best thing that has ever happened to the country. And although there are quite a few things we could point out and say, okay, we have this that was done by the colonial masters, for example, maybe primarily maybe some schools and hospitals that were established. I disagree with that statement that colonialism is the best thing that ever happened to Africa, because of a few reasons. One, the colonial powers carved Africa into what I'd call an arbitrary borders. The border ring system that we now have with boundaries was not there prior to colonialism. But when our colonizers sat in Berlin in mid-1800s to divide Africa among themselves, what we know as the scramble and partition of Africa, these boundaries were created, and they were colonial boundaries. They were put in place for the benefit of the colonizers, for the purpose of establishment of their territories and proof of what ownership among them, also so that the colonizers would know what boundaries to cross and not to cross. It was never for the benefit of Africans. And so now we are having to deal with these colonial borders with all of its challenges. It created division among families. A family, you find a brother is now divided based on the borderline is in one country and part of the family is in another country, and they cannot easily just cross in and visit each other without having to go through custom. And if you have traveled in Africa, you know the chaos that the boundaries that was created by the colonial powers has brought to us. There are a lot more that we could say just about the borders. But the second reason is the plundering of the resources of Africa and the exploitation of its people, something that happened for centuries. And of course, the extractive industries that was established by the colonizers continued to siphon off wealth from indigenous African people, leaving these communities impoverished. And so with it, the colonial economies therefore were also structured to serve the interest of the colonizers. The extracting of the raw materials, for example, freely or at most cheaply, most time freely, they extract the raw materials from Africa, take it to wherever they could take it, manufacture our raw material into finished product, and then import it back to us and sell it to us at a fortune, right? And so even though, like I've mentioned, there could be one or two or three things we're saying this was because of colonialism, look at what happened for the most part for 150, 160 years plus of being in, at least let me give an example of East Africa. What did the colonial masters teach us? Well, agriculture-wise, they taught us to grow sugarcane, but they didn't teach us how to convert our sugarcane into sugar. They introduced us to sugar. They made us get used to sugar, right? Taught us how to grow sugarcane, but not convert our sugarcane into sugar. They taught us to grow coffee, and were very intentional about it, but we could never convert our coffee into coffee. Well, so we can grow, harvest it, and process and even dry the coffee beans, but then we have to export it, right? We could grow tea, but then we couldn't process it. And we grow cotton, but then we couldn't convert the cotton into cloth. So you notice all of this. So even though we could say, well, we have all of these economic things that we could do because of them, well, at the end of it all, who benefits, because we grow the cotton and then we have to sell the cotton to them at their price, because they are the only one that can process and convert the cotton into cloth, and so then sell it to us in cloth form more expensively. That we grow the tea and sell it to them, and they process and bring it to us packaged, and we buy expensively. That we grow coffee and sell to them the beans, the coffee beans. They take our coffee beans and convert it into coffee. So you notice, for example, how some countries in the West, for example, Belgium, known for its chocolate and all of the things. Belgium does not produce coffee, does not produce cocoa or anything like that, but it's the largest producer of chocolate. How come? The coffee and the cocoa and all of those things, where does it come from? It comes from Africa. Well, so look at all of these things. In a way, there's not so much a good thing. Lastly, I want to give this, and that is the system of governance. And so the system of governance that was established to mimic and mirror the the system of governance from the colonial masters, the countries that were colonized by Britain. The system of governance, its parliament and all of that was set to mirror how the parliament in the UK, in Britain looks like and functioned like, so that the queen or the king, whoever would be in power at the time, would be able to have control of their colonies, because the system is already set up in a way that they can control. The ones that was colonized by France, the same thing. The ones that colonized by Portugal, the same thing. Or Belgium, the same thing, in all of these ways. And so years later we say we want independence. They say it's okay, you want independence, we'll give it to you. But they did not teach us and equip us to run our country based on the system of governance they set in place. And so with it then, now remember, before the colonial masters came, African countries, African ethnic groups and its kingdoms and chiefdoms were functioning and flourishing and doing well. Africa had its own system of governance, which was working very well. Somehow we were told our African way of governance, African way of leadership was not right. And so we need to abandon it. We embrace the system that is brought by the West, which we're not taught how to handle it. And so now here we are, supposedly independent. We're supposed to continue now running the government and running the system based on a program set up to function and serve the interest of someone else. We don't know how it functions, and we keep struggling and wondering why it doesn't work, because we were not equipped to do it. And so at the end, we keep saying we're failing and tell us we're failing. No, we're not failing. We were set to fail. There's certain things that need to change. Last thing, let me say this. Think about education system. Well, education is good. We should definitely go to school and study and, learn as much as we can. But there are a lot of things in the syllabus that needs to change. Here's an example. At least all of you and I who've gone to school through primary and high school, you definitely had to do British Columbia. You definitely had to study the Canadian prairies. If you studied history, you definitely, if you did the French Revolution, you definitely studied about the annexation of Corsica Island into France that made Napoleon qualified as a French citizen. Therefore, he qualified to fight for the revolution, right? So here's a question. What does the knowledge of the British Columbia help you? How does it help you as a Ugandan or a Kenyan or an African living in an African continent? How does understanding the Canadian prairies and its different system of irrigation and growth and crops and all of that help you here in the African soil? How does the knowledge of annexation of Corsica Island have to do with you as an African who's doing his best to live and survive and hopefully thrive in the African continent? So somehow we are going to school and we're studying and we're learning, but yet a lot of the things we're learning are useless. We can't ever use it again. For those of you who have now finished school, maybe you've been working for a while, at least help me out. You can maybe write it down in the comment section. Have you ever found at any time where you found the knowledge of the Canadian priories useful in your employment? The knowledge of the British Columbia useful in your employment? The knowledge of the French Revolution useful in your employment? You notice, we were taught all of these things, we mastered, we could draw the map of British Columbia, eyes closed. We could draw the map of Canada and the priories very well, the Alps and all of those things very well. We can draw the map of the United States, map of Britain and Great Britain, and elaborate on all of this history of American history, of Europe and Britain and all of these things, of France. But when we talk the history of Africa, as if you're Ugandan, do you know the history of Uganda? Do you know what Uganda looks like and how it functioned in 1700, in 1600, in early 1800, before the 1900 Uganda Agreement, for example? Do you know how Uganda functioned and what happened when that agreement was signed and Uganda became a British protectorate from 1900 to 1962, for example, when we got our independence? No, for the most part we don't. If you're a Kenyan, do you know the history of Kenya? About its people, its diversity and ethnic differences, and the why we should celebrate it, and the land that we have, and how beneficial and valuable, and what kind of crops we can grow on it, and how to really bring the best out of our crops. Think about it in whichever part of Africa you're coming from. Do you know the history of your country very well and of your culture very well? And if we're being honest, for the most part, no. But we know the history of Europe very well. Because somehow, even though we have this education, the curriculum and the syllabi was designed to teach us history of the West, so that we know more about them than we know about ourselves, so that they can easily come and whatever they tell us about ourselves, we'll believe it because we don't know. So yes, there's a lot that we could point out to say this was a result of colonialism. Of course, one of the things is the language of speaking. I'm using English right now, which was partly because of that. Maybe dress, because now we have this processed clothes and things like that. But for the most part, no. Colonialism is not the best thing that has happened to the African continent. And so if you are among the people who believe that colonialism is the best thing that happened to the African continent, maybe you can at least convince me otherwise in the comment section. But otherwise, I hope to somehow help someone out there in case you were struggling with what colonialism has done in the African continent. And this is just a bit, just something very small out of many, many things that could be said, out of hours and hours of lecture on colonialism and neocolonialism and its danger in Africa. Anyway, God bless you and see you in our next one.